Mr. Lowe, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield for questions?
The gentleman yield for questions.
Yes, I yield.
The gentleman yields for questions.
Representative Talarico, I'm extremely concerned by your allegations of the governor's threats against members. Which members did he threaten? Which of my colleagues did he threaten?
I don't have permission from those colleagues to divulge their names.
It certainly wasn't me. I don't think the governor even has my phone number. I'm a lowly freshman.
Sure.
But surely you do know who the governor has threatened, right?
I certainly know members that he has threatened, yes.
Republican members, right?
Yes, sir.
And your contention is that their votes on the board later today will be based upon the threats of the governor, correct?
No, sir. I certainly hope that members of this body will vote their districts and vote their conscience. And to be honest with you, Representative Little, my experience in this chamber, even as a Democrat, I'm in the minority, certainly don't agree on every issue. I've found that even the members that I disagree with the most have a lot of integrity. It's why I enjoy working in this chamber. And I've known this House to be independent. I've known this House to be courageous. And that gives me a lot of faith in this process, even when things don't go my way on the floor, which is most of the time, as you can imagine.
I share your faith in this process and the faith in the members here. And I believe that, and I think you'll agree that the lights that are going to go up on the board here later today, they are the product of sincere disagreement about this topic and not the threats of the governor. Wouldn't you agree?
I certainly hope that's true, yes.
And you believe in the Texas Constitution, yes?
Yes, sir.
In fact, you, right alongside me, I think your desk is back there, you took an oath in this very room to uphold that Constitution, correct?
Yes, sir.
So Article 3 of the Texas Constitution vests the legislature with power in this state and in this chamber and in the Senate to make laws, does it not?
Yes, sir.
And Article 3 of the Texas Constitution provides that no law, none, zero, no laws shall be passed except by bill, doesn't it?
Yes, I'm amending the bill. Yes, sir.
And Article 3 provides that bills may originate in either house and when passed may be amended, offered, or rejected by the other, right?
Yes, sir.
So the House can reject it or the Senate can reject it.
That's right.
Not the voters in the state, correct?
Well, no, that's incorrect because these bills can be amended to require voter approval. I mentioned in my layout the times in our state's history that we've done this. One in the 1980s was Governor Mark White was trying to make the State Board of Education appointed by the governor rather than elected by the people. And so they passed a bill, but they said the voters are going to have to sign off on this before it happens. So it went to the voters. The voters rejected it, and that's why Texans still elect their State Board of Education members. But then there was also the example of horse racing, and again, this was before I was born, so I don't know the exact details of the horse racing issue. But that issue was put to the voters, and the voters approved it, and so then it became law. So it goes both ways, whether voters reject it or approve it. But as long as it's done by the legislature, Representative Little, I will certainly grant there is no citizen-led referendum in Texas. That's not allowed, as we all know. But the legislature can authorize a statewide referendum.
And Representative Talarico, my understanding is this program is a $1 billion program, correct?
This voucher program?
Yes.
In the first biennium, yes. The fiscal note says it's going to grow to $7 billion in the second biennium.
Why did we not seek a statewide referendum on the over $8 billion educational funding bill we just passed? Why weren't you up there offering to amend that and send that to the voters?
I would certainly be open to sending as many big investments to the voters as possible. The thing I would say is particularly special about this issue is how controversial it is and how controversial it has been throughout our state's history. There's not a lot of debate for and against paying teachers. As you saw with the board on this issue, there was unanimous or near unanimous consent from this body to fund our public schools, even though I don't think it's quite enough. I do think this issue is different. As you know, there is bipartisan opposition to vouchers. It failed to pass in the last legislative session because of bipartisan opposition. And then I would add one more thing, which is the influence of big money on this topic in particular. As you know, Jeff Yass, an out-of-state billionaire,
I believe this is personalities, is it not?
Gave $12 million to Greg Abbott.
Members, you shall confine your remarks to the topic at hand and not bring personalities into this matter.
If we're going to delegate Representative Talarico, if we're going to delegate our lawmaking authority directly to the people, why do we need to be here at all? Why don't we just do that with every bill? Is there a good reason to do that?
I would say, and this is just my opinion as a member of the body, is that when an issue is going to have such an impact, such a historic impact on such a critical service like public education, when an issue may raise, and I think will raise, people's property taxes across the state, then that issue, especially when there is bipartisan opposition, especially when there is historical controversy about the issue, to me, and again, Representative Little, this is not up to me, this is up to our body, but I think this body is justified in sending this issue to the voters for their approval because of its impact on public education, because of its impact on taxes. And I agree with the members of this body in past sessions that taxpayers should have the final say before their taxes go up. And I think that applies to this bill more so than many others.
But how does this body decide which bills rise to the question of needing to go to the voters and which bills are important for us to vote upon? For example, we just passed a bill related to education that's over 8 times the size of this one, and there was no animus in this body to send it by referendum to the voters. So how do you suggest that we decide which controversial issues that may or may not have bipartisan opposition that we send to the voters?
So I'll give 2 thoughts. One is, how do we decide? The people in this body decide with those lights up on the board. That's how we make big decisions. That's how we make big decisions on a whole host of topics. Second, I just outlined in my own personal opinion how I would consider sending certain issues to the voters. And I think depending on the scope, depending on the impact on services and taxes, and depending on the level of controversy and opposition, to me, as a lawmaker, as an individual lawmaker, those would play heavily into my decision on whether something should get voter approval.
So Representative Talarico, if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, it sounds like we as a body should decide this issue is simply too important for us to consider in the Texas House of Representatives, and it must be considered by the people. Well, and then we just vote and decide, yes, we all agree this issue is too important for us to consider, and the voters must vote on it on the ballot.
One thing I would clarify, Representative Little, is that by passing the bill, let's assume we put on this amendment that would require voter approval before implementation, then I would assume the bill would pass with that amendment on it. And so we as a legislature, it's not that we're abdicating our responsibility, we are designating this issue in particular for voters to decide. So just by sending it to the voters, we are already designating this as an issue of importance. We're not just saying we're gonna vacate our jobs and we're just gonna send every single item that comes before the legislature to the voters. That's not what I'm advocating for. What I'm advocating for is if we as a body deem that an issue is of such historical importance and will have such an impact on a key service like education and on taxes, that issue rises to the level that we should seek voter approval.
Why is it historically important?
Representative Little, I'll just add that this is not up to me. The only way we will get voter approval on this issue is if this body decides to do so. And that is true on any item that we take up. And so I'm just coming as one legislator, and I'm saying that I believe that this issue rises to the level that we should get voter approval. And again, there is historical precedent. I would, when looking at those historical examples, the reason that those were sent to the voters is because they were particularly controversial, because the body was unclear on its stance on that issue. And so those issues were put to the voters, others were not. And all I'm doing is proposing that the issue of vouchers, because of its historical controversy, because of its bipartisan opposition, and because of the impact it will make on Texans, I think, as an individual legislator, that this issue rises to the level of seeking voter approval. And Representative Little, if you disagree, and I respect your opinion if you disagree, I would encourage you to vote no on the amendment.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Little, for what purpose?
Never mind. Thank you.
That was hilarious. That was hilarious.